So Zohran Mamdani has won the election in New York City, and I think we have a lot to talk about. I think this event, the hysteria around the event, provides almost a perfect science experiment, just a perfect lens to examine some conversations that were happening about 10 years ago, as well as about 20-ish years ago. And something else that I think, this Mamdani thing cuts through. It's almost a perfect science experiment that cuts through so much bullshit and confusion on certain topics, and really, I think, exposes and lays bare a certain kind of bigotry and racism, sure, but maybe something a little bit more clarifying to the whole conversation. And it's something that maybe poetically Zohran's father, the acclaimed academic, kind of laid out for us in his Good Muslim, Bad Muslim thesis, also about 23-ish years ago. So I'm going to read a little bit from that. So let's get into it and explain what I'm really talking about here. So in my last conversation, which was with Ali Rizvi, who has become a friend and has always been a friend, and I think we'll do more of those things. It was kind of a retrospective 10 years looking back on the film that he was in, that I directed, Islam and the Future of Tolerance, with Sam Harris and Majid Nawaz, and some of our reflections on what's happened in the decades since. And I guess Sam saw some of it or got wind of some of it and wasn't entirely happy with all of my characterizations of his positions, including the anti-Semitic devil analogy I was giving. Clearly I was being poetic, but anyway, I don't mean to do that. I don't want to put words in people's mouths. I want to represent people fairly if I'm disagreeing with them. So he reached out, not to me, but to Ali. But in that spirit, I want to actually take people like Sam. I have some clips of Sam I want to watch with you in his own words, in this Mamdani kind of lens of looking at something in particular, as well as Bill Maher, because I think it's super, super useful. So I don't want to put any words in his mouth. I want to listen to the man himself. So I want to watch this first clip with you that I filmed. It was late 2015 or early 2016 to set the stage while I was making that film. We did a bunch of interviews, of course. Not everything made the final cut. And Donald Trump was running for election while we were filming. He had not yet won at the time of this interview. And then he won while we were putting the film together. And one of his first acts was the infamous Muslim ban, which was met with a lot of fanfare. And I wanted to put something out with Sam kind of talking about Islamism and jihadism and immigration and how those things kind of intertwine to kind of help promote the film that was upcoming. And so I want to first watch this clip. So this is about 10 years ago with Sam talking about immigration, Islam, Islamism, jihadism, etc. So let's listen to that and how he sounded then.
It's a war of ideas and a civil war happening within the Muslim world, and we need to empower the moderating voices within that community in any way that we can. And we want those people here in our society, even in the most cynical way. If your only concern was defending free societies from extremism, you want moderate, secular, liberal Muslims in your society as that immune system. I mean, these, in my view, are the most important people in the world. I mean, these people go to the front of my line. The end game for civilization is an integrated, pluralistic, tolerant civil society, and we need diversity in that context. The end game can't be that we all silo ourselves in our separate, more homogenized and radically disparate communities where we just have less interaction with one another. We're talking about the spread of ideas. When you're talking about jihadism, you're not, for the most part, even talking about people crossing borders as migrants and refugees. You're talking about YouTube videos that have been watched that people who may be third-generation citizens or never immigrated at all, these people find these ideas compelling, and these ideas lead to action. And so, if we're going to win a war of ideas with the Muslim world, we need to empower the reforming voices within that community to do it.
Two to be quickly.
A child before I would come back.
Yeah.
I'm only 53 now, and this is
Okay, so secular, moderate, liberal Muslims, the front of Sam's line, the people we want in our society, the most important people in the world in our society. So that's how he was talking about this at that point. And then he also played a clip where he went on Bill Maher's show just a little bit after this one, after the film came out, to react and discuss the same thing. So Bill asks him right before this clip plays about the Muslim ban, and pay attention to how they speak about it there.
It's a terrible idea, even if your only concern is security, right? And that's not our only concern. I hope we get to that topic. But, I mean, we have to win a war of ideas with the Muslim world, and we need allies.
Right.
And
it's not about immigrants, it's about ideas.
Yeah, and we want, yes, the ideas cross borders. I mean, immigration is just one part of this problem, but we should be desperate to have moderate Muslims in this society. We want moderate Muslims.
And ones who speak out. I thought it was great when London elected a Muslim mayor, because when you elect someone mayor, then they have to say out loud our Western values. And he has. He doesn't even like it when women cover their face.
Yeah, and when you view this as a war of ideas, you see that we need to empower the actual reformers in the Muslim world. So
right.
And the way to do that is not to put up a blanket ban.
So desperate to have them in our society, and when you elect a Muslim mayor, he has to say out loud our Western values. And of course there Bill is talking about Sadiq Khan, who had just won the mayorship in London, a major Western city, a historical colonizing city in the West, a financial capital of the world. A Muslim man, Sadiq Khan, wins the mayorship, and apparently thumbs up from Bill Maher. Now, compare this to the reaction, the hysteria around Zohran Mamdani, also a Muslim man, winning the mayorship, also in a major Western financial capital, historical colonizing capital of the world, New York City. And what has changed in these 10 years? What is different between these two men? But first, let's watch now Bill Maher's reaction in the lead up to Zohran Mamdani. And you've probably seen this clip before, but let's watch it together. This is Bill Maher right before Zohran wins.
Been not all that excited about the Democratic Party over the last few years. I think that's a good thing for the Democrats, and I think if you're in a purple district, say you disagree with some of the things that he does, and use that to establish your independent cred.
Well, you make it sound like he's a little more mainstream than I think he is. I mean, the issue now that Andrew Cuomo is bringing up in New York is that he is a Ugandan citizen. Uganda is a country where they kill homosexuals.
So somebody who is a dual citizen can't be mayor of New York, or?
I would renounce, if I was the dual citizen with a country whose policy, government policy, was we kill homosexuals, yeah, I would renounce that citizenship. I don't, and to not to, and he also,
I think that is buying into a fear. I think that is buying into a fear framework that is not
fear
good.
Of killing homosexuals.
It's not good for the country. It's not good for the country.
You shouldn't be afraid of that.
Is Bill Maher afraid that Zohran Mamdani is going to kill homosexuals? Is that really what's happening here? Does he think that his dual citizenship in Uganda has anything to do with who he is and what his policies are, what he really thinks? Does he really think that? Uganda, by the way, a country full of young, heroic people pushing as part of the Gen Z protests right now and these youth movements all over the world for a different world, for a change. That Bill, I guess, just thinks cut him off, renounce your citizenship. Who cares? Because, I don't know, Africa, by the way, Africa and Uganda in specific is one of the countries that Israel is helping promote, give surveillance equipment to, and give all kinds of security equipment to, and to help that repression. So is Israeli surveillance and security probably assisting in that very policy? Anyway, that policy, by the way, the Kill the Gays bill, promoted and pushed by a Western American Christian group called The Family, if anyone knows that story. So I'm not sure how this is not about, when he said Sadiq Khan expressing our Western values, that's becoming a pretty blurry line. Anyway, maybe a story for a different day. And then also pin that idea, that thought, that conversation about Israel and its relationships with African repressive regimes and assisting those in your mind. Because I'm talking to Murtaza Hassan later this week. I'll probably have it out next week, all about that, and the information about Ehud Barak and Jeffrey Epstein in Cote d'Ivoire and many more places, because Yeah, that's a Pandora's box worth looking into as well when we're talking about this supposed our Western values that Bill seems so insistent on. So remember that one. But just crazy, wild difference of the reaction there between Bill and Sadiq Khan and Zohran Mamdani. Let's now go to Sam Harris reacting and being asked about the same thing. This is in conversation with his manager, Jaron. They do these from time to time online, and he gets asked about these kinds of things, jihadism, Islamism, immigration, etc. And he doesn't mention Zohran specifically by name, but I think you can sort of understand who and what he's talking about here. So let's listen to that.
Open societies are perpetually under threat by people who would use the principles of tolerance to undermine tolerance. And one of the most glaring examples of this in recent times is the kind of the stealth and none too stealthy Islamist campaigning everywhere, which is basically trying to smuggle in theocracy into Western communities. And the liberals, the erstwhile liberals, the left wing of every left wing party has been successfully gulled by this, or has just, not been actually deceived, but just for other reasons decided to make common cause with Islamists. And so, this has been supercharged by the war in Gaza of late, and the nascent or endemic anti-Semitism on the left and in the Muslim community. So yeah, it's what to do about it is there's no easy answer to that. I mean, we can't tip over into xenophobia and bigotry. We have to focus on dangerous ideas rather than specific classes of people. But in broad strokes, you can say it's certainly tempting to notice that specific classes of people have more than their share of dangerous ideas, right? So when you have a regime like the second Trump administration or some of the right-wing parties in Western Europe wanting to filter by Muslims or immigrants from specific countries, Muslim majority countries, it's easy to see why that's tempting. I don't agree with any of that, but the underlying concern is something I'm also very much worried about, which is the spread of Islamism and jihadism in the West.
So if you don't.
So Jaron will push on that a little bit and tease it out to see exactly what he means. He's very tempted, but he doesn't agree with any of it, but very tempted by those things. Okay, stealth Islamist and Islamism. Zohran Mamdani, is this the Islamist you feared? Is this the guy you feared? This is him and his wife. This is him campaigning at gay clubs. This is him Knicks games. This is the Islamist and the stealthy Islamist that you feared all along, or as you said, maybe made common cause. We can talk about that in a bit. This is really the difference. This is what you feared. Don't tip over into xenophobia, I suppose, but have tons of conversations with outright xenophobes on your show and just sort of let them do the dirty work for you and say you're tempted, but you don't agree. Okay. Well, I think the reaction is quite telling there, but let's let Sam continue to just tease that out. In fairness to him, again, I don't want to put words in his mouth. You're listening to him himself. You heard him 10 years ago, thumbs up. Now, apparently, stealthy Islamist is what we're worried about. So let's hear what he has to say a little bit more on that, what that temptation leads for him.
I agree with that. How do you solve that problem? So if you can't say, okay, we're going to try to keep anybody out of the country who's going to use democracy or
well, we should do that.
Against it.
We should
so
vet
how do
people.
You do that?
We just shouldn't say we're going to keep everyone from Somalia out of the country, or everyone from Eritrea or Saudi Arabia, or just pick your country.
But how do you find out if somebody's more religious or less religious? So you say,
there has to be some process of vetting. I mean, we have to screen people. We have to talk to people. We have to do online research about people. I mean, they have to have references. I'm not into the weeds on what the process actually is, but clearly there's some process that's possible whereby we could raise the probability of successfully catching jihadists and Islamists who are trying to immigrate. And we have to acknowledge that we want to do that. I mean, just as we wouldn't want to import Nazis into our society, we should not be eager to import Islamists and jihadists into our society.
Right. So where do you draw the line with, and I'm blanking on his name, from Colombia, who was tossed out and then brought back. You know, where do you draw the line with someone like him?
Khalil, I think his name was.
That's right, Mahmood Khalil.
Yeah. Well, I think we should acknowledge it's different once someone has been admitted and been given a green card, right? Then there's a different burden of proof, and there's got to be a different procedure, right? So it's better to keep people out rather than let them in and then figure out how to respond to the fact that they're in now legally. But yeah, I mean, if someone is sufficiently despicable, I think we should be able to rescind their green card and kick them out of the country. I mean, it's not the same thing as you're not a citizen if you have a green card. And, ultimately we have to figure out what to do with citizens who go bonkers and believe these things, right? I mean, this is, that's under the rubric of free speech and freedom of religion, but we have a problem with potentially homegrown jihadists. This is a problem that's easy to forget about given all the other problems in the world. But the moment we have another terrorist attack in the society of any scale, all of a sudden we're going to realize this problem never went away. It's a bigger problem in Western Europe than it is in America, but it's a problem here too. I don't, again, we have to err on the side of tolerating the expression of any ideas, right? I don't think we should be kicking people out for saying despicable things. But the moment they do more than merely talk about them, the moment they're planning to do something, the moment they're physically obstructing life on a university campus, keeping Jews out of certain buildings, or bullying them physically, right? Spitting in people's faces who are trying to attend lectures. All those kinds of things have happened on college campuses. All of that's illegal, right? All of that should get you kicked out of. I mean, it should get you prosecuted, but it should also get you. It's all assault, but it should also get you kicked out of school, right? These people shouldn't be, winning awards for social activism. They should be kicked out of these Ivy League universities for behaving badly.
Okay, they go on. So despicable actions. I've never once heard him talk about the Zionists and Israelis and Jews who engage in that exact kind of behavior all the time, probably proportionally much, much higher, frankly. Never heard him talk about that. But okay, let's talk about these dangerous ideas that he keeps bringing up. And let's go to really the point that I want to talk about of Zohran Mamdani and the reaction versus Sadiq Khan. Because one, thumbs up, Sadiq. The other, thumbs down, Zohran. Is the difference between these two men and the reactions that you just saw from Bill and Sam, is the difference between them that they're Islamists, that one of them is an Islamist and one of them is not? Is that really what you're running with? Is that really, this is a stealth Islamist over here and this one is not? Well, I don't think that's really true. I think both of them are probably equally secular in their lifestyle and their thoughts. If anything, Zohran would probably be more sort of secular and liberal. So what is it? What is really the difference in these men? And what has really changed, obviously, in these last 10 years to lead to such a monumentally different response and different piece of rhetoric? So this is where I want to bring in Mamood Mamdani and his work in Good Muslim, Bad Muslim. And just as a caveat, of course, Zohran is not his father. I'm not going to have him beholden to the same exact thoughts and ideas or whatever. He's his own man, and it doesn't mean he's going to walk in these exact footsteps. But I'm going to read to you a good chunk, not all of it, from an article of Good Muslim, Bad Muslim that was out in 2002. So this is still in the aftermath of 9/11, which is when Sam and the New Atheists sort of burst onto the scene, Sam with the book The End of Faith. And so when I think you'll hear Mamood reference culture talk, I think he's really directly almost responding to the conversation that was there in the post 9/11 world. So I'm going to read a little bit of the intro and I'll skip ahead. And I think the answer to this question, this perplexing puzzle of these two reactions, really is revealed in his father's work. So this appeared in the American Anthropological Association in 2002. I'm going to start reading from the beginning. This is Mahmood Mamdani. Media interest in Islam exploded in the months after September 11th. What many asked is the link between Islam and terrorism. The question has fueled a fresh round of culture talk, the predilection to define cultures according to their presumed essential characteristics, especially as regards politics. An earlier round of such discussion, associated with Samuel Huntington's widely cited but increasingly discredited Clash of Civilizations from 1996, demonized Islam in its entirety. Its place has been taken by a modified line of argument that the terrorist link is not with all of Islam, but with a very literal interpretation of it, one found in Wahhabism. First advanced by Stephen Schwartz in a lead article in the British weekly, The Spectator, 2001, this point of view went to the ludicrous extent of claiming that all suicide couriers, bombers, or hijackers are Wahhabi, and warned that this version of Islam, historically dominant in Saudi Arabia, had been exported to both Afghanistan and the United States in recent decades. The argument was echoed widely in many circles, including the New York Times. Culture talk has turned religious experience into a political category. What went wrong with modern civilization, asks Bernard Lewis in a lead article in the Atlantic Monthly, 2002. Democracy lags in the Muslim world, concludes a Freedom House study of political systems in the non-Western world. The problem is larger than Islam, concludes Arya Nair in 2001, former president of the Human Rights Watch, and now head of the Soros-funded Open Society Foundation. It lies with tribalists and fundamentalists, contemporary counterparts of the Nazis, who have identified modernism as their enemy. Even the political leadership of the Anti-Terrorism Alliance, notably Tony Blair and George Bush, speak of the need to distinguish good Muslims from bad Muslims. The implication is undisguised. Whether in Afghanistan, Palestine, or Pakistan, Islam must be quarantined and the devil must be exorcised from it by a civil war between good Muslims and bad Muslims. Starting to sound a little familiar with the Civil War talk. I want to suggest that we lift the quarantine for analytical purposes and we turn the cultural theory of politics on its head. This, I suggest, will help our query in at least two ways. First, it will have the advantage of deconstructing not just one protagonist of the contemporary contest, Islam, but also the other, the West. My point goes beyond the simple but radical suggestion that if there are good Muslims and bad Muslims, there also must be good Westerners and bad Westerners. I intend to question the very tendency to read Islamist politics as an effect of Islamic civilization, whether good or bad, and Western power as an effect of Western civilization. Further, I shall suggest that both those politics and that power are born in an encounter, and neither can be understood in isolation, outside of the history of that encounter. Okay, so then he goes on to kind of break into culture talk, and I'll read a little bit more here, because he starts talking sort of about this modern versus pre-modern line that people were wanting to push at the time of there's modern Muslims and pre-modern Muslims, right? So this is what he's talking about here. Is our world really divided into the modern and the pre-modern, such that the former makes culture in which the latter is a prisoner? This dichotomy is increasingly prevalent in the Western discussions of relations with Muslim-majority countries. It presumes that culture stands for creativity, for what being human is all about. In one part of the world, that called modern, but that in the other part of the world, labeled pre-modern, culture stands for habit, for some kind of instinctive activity whose rules are inscribed in early founding texts, usually religious, and mummified in early artifacts. When I read of Islam in the papers these days, I often feel I am reading of museumized peoples, of peoples who are said not to make culture, except at the beginning of creation, as some extraordinary prophetic act. After that, it seems we Muslims, just conform to culture. Our culture seems to have no history, no politics, and no debates. It seems to have petrified into a lifeless custom. Even more, these people seem incapable of transforming their culture the way they seem incapable of growing their own food. The implication is that their salvation lies, as always, in philanthropy, in being saved from the outside. So the article goes on, and I'll read just two more little sections of it to talk about how you have to really contextualize Islam and the rise of Islamism and all these things. So I'm going to go on to where he goes into this part. Doctrinal tendencies aside, I remain deeply skeptical of the claim that we can read people's political behavior from their religion or from their culture. Could it be true that an Orthodox Muslim is a potential terrorist, or the same thing that an Orthodox Jew or Christian is a potential terrorist, and only a Reform Jew or a Christian convert to Darwinian evolution theory is capable of being tolerant of those who do not share his or her convictions. I'm aware that this does not exhaust the question of culture and politics. How do you make sense of a politics that consciously wears the mantle of religion? Take, for example, the politics of Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda. Both claim to be waging a jihad, a just war against the enemies of Islam. To try to understand this uneasy relationship between politics and religion, I find it necessary not only to shift the focus from doctrinal to historical Islam, from doctrine and culture to history and politics, but also to broaden the focus beyond Islam to include larger historical encounters, of which bin Laden and al-Qaeda have been one outcome. He then goes on to of course, put that encounter in historical context with, he says, the Cold War after Indochina. Ahmad draws our attention to the television image from 1985 of Ronald Reagan inviting a group of turbaned men, all Afghan, all leaders of the Mujahideen, to the White House lawn for an introduction to the media. These gentlemen are the moral equivalents of America's founding fathers, said Reagan. This was the moment when the United States tried to harness one version of Islam in a struggle against the Soviet Union before exploring its politics. Let me provide some historical background to the moment. Anyway, he goes on and talks about, of course, how the U.S. abandoned them and everything else. He then goes on to contextualize historically a lot of these Islamist, jihadist type movements, to give them historical context, like he said, to put them in an encounter with the West, with each other. So I'll read just one more little part here, then I'll read his outro. So he says, my point is simple. Contemporary fundamentalism is a modern political project, not a traditional cultural leftover. To be sure, one can trace many of the elements in the present fundamentalist project, such as opium production, madrasas, and the very notion of jihad akbar, to the era before modern colonization, just as one can identify forms of slavery prior to the era of merchant capitalism. Just as transatlantic slavery took a pre-modern institution and utilized it for purposes of capitalist accumulation, stretching its scale and brutality far beyond pre-capitalist practice or imagination, so cold warriors turned traditional institutions such as Jihad Akbar and madrasas and traditional stimulants such as opium to modern political purposes on a scale previously unimagined, with devastating consequences. Opium, madrasas, Jihad Akbar, all were reshaped as they were put into the service of a global U.S. campaign against the evil empire. So Mamood Mamdani goes on with this good Muslim, bad Muslim, who's a good Muslim, who's a bad Muslim, what does this rhetoric really mean, and constantly and consistently wants to contextualize, historically, the rise of these kinds of factors. I mean, he sounds just like Hamid Dabashi, who was on my show, who wrote The Theology of Discontent. And I think you could see through him and Hamid Dabashi, they don't downplay or erase the role of doctrinal Islam or pre-modern texts or whatever in the role of all these things. They simply want to contextualize the rise of these things. And then this good Muslim, bad Muslim, this is the really key important point of his thesis, is that it is not, all of that stuff about pre-modern into the text, the good Muslim, bad Muslim is not the way the West wants to foist it upon them in relation to Islam. The good Muslim and bad Muslim is not in their devotion or relation to Islam. That's not what it is. It's in their devotion and relation to the West, and in particular, the United States post-World War II led project. The good Muslim is in favor of it or cooperates with it, the bad Muslim doesn't, which has very little, almost nothing to do with the two Muslims in question, with their relation to Islam. And there, I think you see the difference between Sadiq Khan and Zohran Mamdani, where, one, I think Sadiq Khan represents basically a cookie-cutter neoliberal capitalist project. He won in the Labour Party, but I don't think was seen as a threat or as something new that was going to rock the system. And then Zohran Mamdani, who kind of does, right? Zohran Mamdani, whose middle name is Kwame, given his name by his father after Kwame Nkrumah, the Ghanaian African leader who wrote the book Neocolonialism, who I talk about all the time on this show, who was a bit of a Marxist thinker and was very skeptical of the American-led project post-World War II as a new form of colonialism and imperialism. This is the school of thought of Zohran Mamdani, right? I don't know what he's going to do, if he's going to push that into the world and continue that in his policies. I'm not, really holding out any hope that that's what that is. But I think that's what he represents there. And let me be very clear when I'm talking about this. So Mahmood Mamdani and this kind of school of thinking that is focused very much on anti-colonial thought and post-colonial thought, when we say colonization, and I think you got a little bit of it there, when we say colonization, we're not talking about, this is a really important point that people keep getting wrong, we're not talking about just general conquest and pillage of empires, which everybody has engaged in. You always kind of hear this pushback of like, well, everybody just, had from all time, everything just conquest and whatever. No, we're talking very specifically about colonization as a concomitant phenomenon, a necessary phenomenon through the Marxist lens of the capitalist project, really from Europe, 17th century, 15th century, depending on where you draw the line onward. That's what we're talking about. That type of colonization is what we're talking about. And so decolonization in this context really does take on a bit of an anti-capitalist, or at least capitalist skeptical point of view. And let me be clear, if you find yourself convinced or engaged in the conversation about anti-colonization and anti-colonialism from a moral perspective or from any other economic perspective, you will find yourself concerned, naturally, about Palestine and what's happening in Palestine as a prime example, I would think, focal point, as maybe a keystone of that argument. So many people get into the conversation that way. It could, of course, also happen from the other way, that you're morally outraged by the horror and the killing, what you see on the ground in Palestine, and then you discover these larger conversations about anti-colonialism and whatever. But you could get in from either way. So I don't know Zohran's exact path here, but clearly he's in that conversation. And when he talks about Palestine, it is in that context, I would argue. So what's changed? What changed 10 years ago from now? Well, clearly the situation in Palestine has become front and center in people's minds. And that has changed. But is it about Islamism? Do you really think, Bill and Sam, that Zohran Mamdani is an Islamist? No, perhaps there's a conversation, as Sam sort of alluded to there, with common cause. If you think being engaged in the anti-colonial movements, that maybe Zohran is, and anti-capitalist kind of conversations, you made common cause with Islamists or whatever, or too soft on Islamists, that it's sort of a Trojan horse, either intentionally or not, that's a conversation we can have. But let's be very clear about what the dangerous ideas that you said you really feared. Because I don't think you own your own argument enough. What you really fear and what you really stand for is capitalism. And what you really fear is an anti-capitalist conversation. It's not that he's an Islamist. You know he's not an Islamist. You're freaking out because he represents a little dent, maybe, a little knock on the door that the system might be under threat. And I think systemic change is something that really, really frightens you. And to someone like Mahmood Mamdani, who is a post-colonial thinker and studies these things about Islam and the West and how they fit into context, these kinds of conversations and these kinds of reactions really just reek of an echo of what has been happening in rhetoric and discourse of colonizers really since the beginning. This really harkens back to sort of the noble savage versus sort of the savage, right? The noble savage is not the one who's just too devoted to their ancient gods and just won't get on board, with your God and your customs. It's the one who won't play along with your economic systems. It's the noble savage is the one who plays the part and plays along and opens things up. So am I calling Sadiq Khan a noble savage? No, but clearly he fits more of that bill, where people are worried that Zohran is not so noble, which has nothing to do with his Muslimness, right? He has nothing to do. You don't if you really think this guy's about to kill gays and go on an Islamist rampage, we could make some bets if you want. But if you're worried that he's going to start maybe importing and opening some ideas that are a bit anti-capitalist, a bit more leftist, that's what really scares you. That's what really scares you. And again, let's see what he does. But I think that global conversation is here now, and it's open for us. And I think if you listen to your own selves and you can own the argument yourself, you'll see really what you thought the dangerous ideas were all along. And then we could talk about it.